Esau was a skillful hunter. Esau, he was a man of the open country. He was a man wild and free. You know, we're not led to believe Esau needed to be a hunter. I mean, his family had flocks. They had servants. They had animals. They had everything they needed to provide food for their family. They had plenty. They had an abundance. He didn't need to necessarily be a hunter, but this is what he liked to do. This is what he wanted to do. And he was a man of the open country. He was a skillful hunter. He would go out and he would hunt and he would bring back wild game. We got a lot of hunters in our church. In fact, Eddie is one of the men in our church that goes out hunting, and so I don't. But I like deer, and so I like the meat. And so I told him a few months ago when deer season first started, he was going out hunting. He's like, "Oh man, I'll see something. If I see something, you want me to shoot it for you?" So he doesn't kill just anything, and in fact, he can't even eat red meat right now, which is I don't know how he's surviving. But anyway. But these are his exact words. Oh, even if I see a doe, I'll get it for you. These are his exact words. I'll smoke you a doe, no problem. He's going out hunting. I'll smoke you a doe, no problem. Later that evening, after he was done hunting, I called him. Hey, did you kill anything? Do I need to get it? Take it to the I'm sure he's got something. Man, I didn't see nothing. I was out there all morning. I didn't see a single deer. While he's telling me that, I'm driving down the road, and there's like 5 or 6 on the side of the road right then. I'm like, what is it? Where's he at? Esau was this man who was this skillful hunter, and he would go out and he would hunt this wild game, and he would bring it in because not that he needed to, but he liked to do it. He wanted to. He enjoyed this. This was who he was, and he just was a wild, free man. Jacob, on the other hand, was this calculated, kind of cunning, reflective, thinking through person. But in this moment, this skillful hunter, well, he came back empty-handed on this occasion. Apparently, he didn't see anything either. On this occasion, Esau was coming back in from hunting, and while he was the hunter, he was the one that became the hunted. He is supposed to be the skillful hunter, but in what we just read, his younger brother Jacob lays the trap. His younger brother Jacob sets the trap and gets everything ready for him, and he, like a wild beast, runs right in to this trap, and he gives away the blessing of the birthright and the spiritual blessings of God. He gives all of that away for he and his family forever because he steps right into the trap. And he takes the bait that was prepared not by him, but what was prepared for him. It's interesting what's going on. The way the Hebrew writer puts this for us, it's very colorful. The verse 29 tells us that Jacob was cooking stew. That's vayazid nazid. Vayazid nazid. Jacob was cooking stew. Now that's only interesting because when the text tells us in verse 27, up prior to that Esau was a skillful hunter, the word for hunter is the word sayid. Sayid. What Jacob was doing was vayazid nazid. And so the Hebrew author is using those words to say, because they sound like, in sound, they sound like the word for hunter. And what the author is really telling us is that even though Esau is the hunter, what Jacob is doing is he is hunting him by his act of cooking and boiling this stew. It's also a phrase that speaks of presumption, of calculating this out, of thinking through all of this and planning this out carefully. And this is what Jacob is doing. And what we see in this text is we see Jacob, a man who is preparing this and setting his trap, something that I think we're led to believe through the way this is crafted that he's been planning this for some time. He has valued the spiritual birthright, the family blessing. He has valued that. And he's setting this trap for his older brother Esau. I don't know that they're at the home site. I think maybe it's more likely that Jacob is a mile or 2 miles away from camp. And I mean, it's not like there's, I'm just thinking like if he's at camp and Esau comes back and his brother's cooking and he has to sell his birthright for the food. Well, now forget that. I'll go see mom. That's what I'm thinking. Like, I just go see mom. I think it's more likely that Jacob knows Esau's out. He knows from which direction he's going to be coming, and he's maybe a mile or two in that direction. He's got his tent set up, and he's sitting there cooking his bowl of red beans, and he's stewing that, and he's laying this trap for Esau. Esau is seen in this scene as what he is, a man that's wild. He's a lot like the beasts that he would be hunting. He's a very emotional man. He's not thinking through the consequences or the implications of any of this. He comes in verse 30 and he says to Jacob, let me eat some of that red stew. The actual rendering of this is literally, feed me now. Like, he's impulsive, he's hasty. This phrase that he says here, let me eat some of that red stew. This phrase here, the verb there is a verb that was used by the rabbis to describe the act of cramming food down the throat of an animal. Like, give me something. Feed me now. And he's like this wild animal. He's not thinking through. It's a vivid picture of a wild, ravenous animal, unconcerned about anything but the food that would satisfy his appetite in the moment. And he goes right in and he falls for the trap. And in an exchange, he gets a bowl of soup to satisfy his physical appetites. And what does he do? He gives up the exchange of the birthright. Jacob leaves with the birthright, the spiritual blessing. And he ate the bread and the lentil stew. He ate, drank, he rose, and he went his way. And he despised his birthright. We don't have time to get into all this morning, but there is a strong parallel in Genesis 25 here. There's a strong parallel that Alan Ross has pointed out in Creation and Blessing, a foundational work on the Genesis account. There's a strong parallel with the fall in Genesis 3, where Adam and Eve took of the fruit and they ate, and they fell into sin. In both accounts here, with Esau falling into this trap and with Eve and with Adam falling into the trap that was laid for them, in both accounts there's a confrontation between this shrewd, conniving, crafty, deceptive being that lays the trap and the naive, the one who just runs right into it. In both, the spiritual blessing, the spiritual benefit is traded for food. In both, after the exchange, the narrative reports the development with a series of verbs in rapid succession. For us, after he takes the bait, he eats, he drinks, he rises, and he goes his way. In each, the narrative reports that. At the heart of each of these is the dialogue that invites the seemingly naive to surrender spiritual blessings and eternal blessings for the satisfaction of natural physical desires. Esau chose a bowl of red stuff, a bowl of soup, over a spiritual heritage for his family. It's interesting. We won't get into this deeply, but I want you to note this. I think he took his cues from his father. What does it say about Isaac? We know that Isaac loved Esau. We know that the text says Rebekah loved Jacob. Why does it say why does it say Isaac loved Esau? Verse 28. He loved Esau because why? Because he ate of his game. I think Esau takes his cues for caring more about fulfilling and gratifying his fleshly appetites over the spiritual blessings. He cares more about all of that because he takes his cues from his father. His dad loved him. Why? Not for any spiritual reason, not because of who he was. His dad liked him, loved him more because he gave him something to fulfill his physical appetite. He takes it right from his dad. We often see that in the way things play out. That actually shows a weakness of Isaac, the father. It shows and kind of previews a weakness of his that will show up in a little bit later. A weakness of his appetite and his fleshly desires. The irony in all of this here is that while Esau is the skillful hunter, Jacob proves to actually be the better one by laying the trap for him. There's nothing said in this text negative about Jacob. I mean, it's not like the text tells us anything negative about him. He knew that this was promised to him. But there's nothing negative said, but there's no divine approval of it either. There's no divine approval of it either. And I think the focus of all this is for us to look at Esau and to consider him. There's three reasons why I think this story is here. One, I think this story is included in the Genesis narrative here to show the reader that God's decrees do come to pass, that they do come to pass. God had just decreed and declared to Rebekah previously that there were two nations in her womb and that they'd be separated and they'd be fighting, but the younger would be the stronger one. The older one would actually serve the younger, and now we're beginning to see that God's decrees, something that would be not natural, would not be natural, are beginning to come to pass. We would read that and think, that's not how things work. And then the text says, yeah, but here's how it's beginning to play out already. You can see even in this, who's the stronger one? It's Jacob. I think it also is written to show how human choices become part of God's decrees. God decrees that this is going to be the case, but Esau is the one who rejected and despised the birthright. His choice, his decision in this moment to gratify his flesh becomes part of the plan that God had said would come to pass. And then third, I think, and what we'll focus on is, I think it's included for us here to reveal the folly of living for earthly appetites and the gratification of personal desire with no regard for spiritual things, for tomorrow, or for anyone else. I think that's why this story is included for us, and that's what we want to kind of glean from it today. The focus in this text, even though this is about Jacob and it's moving towards Jacob being part of this lineage and part of this line and heritage that will bring about the Messiah, I think that the reason that this is included here is so that we will learn from the negative example of Esau. It says, when this scene finished up, that Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew in verse 34, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. And it says, thus Esau despised his birthright. It doesn't say, thus Jacob obtained the birthright. The author of Genesis is saying to us, focus on Esau in this narrative. The focus is on him here. So what do we learn? We learn about the foolishness of living for earthly appetites and gratifying our own personal fleshly desires without any regard for spiritual things, for tomorrow, or anyone else. The author in the New Testament, Paul, in 1 Corinthians 2:14 said, but the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are what? Foolishness unto him. Neither can he know them because they are spiritually discerned. I couldn't help but think about that verse as I studied this account of Esau and looked at how he chose to gratify his physical desire over the spiritual blessings of God for him and for his family from generation to generation to generation. And I said, why is this? He looks at this and he says to Jacob, I'm about to die. If I'm about to die, that birthright means nothing to me. Well, if you're about to die, that's the only thing that means anything to you. But this was foolish to him. This was foolishness to him. Oftentimes, the things of God and the spiritual ways of God and concern for the more valuable spiritual things of life become and appear foolish to those that are of the natural mindset. The author of Hebrews tells us not to be like Esau. We see later in the New Testament, Hebrews tells us not to be like Esau, who was more concerned about having a bowl of soup to fill his stomach than the spiritual blessings of God for his family and all of eternity. Look at how Hebrews puts this for us. He says, the author of Hebrews tells us to work at living in peace with everyone and work at living a holy life, for those who are not holy will not see the Lord. Look after each other. I want to stop for just a minute there. It says, look after each other. The warning of Hebrews is to do this together. Like, this is a challenge. This ought to be a conviction to all of us that we're to actually look after each other in the process of warning each other, keeping each other from doing what Esau did. It says, look after each other so that none of you fails to receive the grace of God. Watch out that no poisonous root of bitterness grows up to trouble you, corrupting many. And it says, make sure that no one is immoral or godless like Esau, who traded his birthright as the firstborn son for a single meal You know that afterward, when he wanted his father's blessing, he was rejected. It was too late for repentance, even though he begged with bitter tears. We're going to see that later, that when Esau comes back and kind of realizes what is done, and when he realizes that the birthright and the blessing is gone forever, he cries and he weeps bitterly, and he begs his father to give him that blessing or some of the blessing. Can he do anything? And yet he can't. It's too late. There are some choices that in the moment, in the heat of the choice, we make a decision to do something, and God will forgive, but there will be consequences that can never be undone because of that. And so the author of Hebrews even says, look after each other, and in doing that, look at the example of Esau, and don't be like him. Don't be like Esau. He gave up all the spiritual blessings and benefits in a moment to fill his appetite. Don't do that. And help each other with that. You know, it's good that we know how to learn from poor examples. We need that. We have those for us in the Scriptures. We oftentimes need to see poor examples in order to learn what not to do. So like I've been thinking a little bit about this. Allison and I are, getting ready to have another baby and a little girl, and she'll be born, and hopefully sometime in the next few weeks. And due date's April 16th. And so, it's been like 4 years since we've had a baby. We got Isaac, Noah, and David, but it's been like 4 years since we had a little baby. So I know we've got some mothers out here expecting. We've got some that have newborn babies. And so, like, I found these instructions online very helpful because they show us not just what to do, but they also show us what not to do. And they do it in a picturesque, in a visual way, like little instructions, like drying baby, right? Like, this is helpful. All right, and you didn't know you were going to get this today, but this is going to be a blessing to all of you. Like, this is how you dry the baby. I learned a little bit more from what not to do. All right, so how many of you learn better from seeing what not to do? Some of us are like that. This is bonding with the baby. This is good for moms to remember. Okay, that's how you bond with the baby. New moms, you just remember these. All right, this is how you introduce them to pets. I thought that was a very clever way of showing us what not to do. This is how you bundle the baby. You got a good way of doing it, bad way. This is how you buckle them up and how you shouldn't. Just be aware of that. I thought this was helpful. This is how you wash the baby, how you don't wash the baby, how you exercise the baby, and how you don't. I found that to be beneficial. Hebrews says to us, look at the example of Esau. Don't be like that. Don't be like that. Don't be like Esau, who gave up the spiritual blessing and the birthright for a single meal. In a hasty moment of choice, he acted in a way that we ought to avoid. So I've kind of just organized these three practical takeaways for you along the lines that I think carnal individuals follow the unsuitable example of Esau in three detrimental ways. I just want to kind of see what we see from Esau and make that practical for you as we close today. Carnal, say, what is carnal? Carnal's a good word. We don't use that word very much. I mean, you probably haven't heard that word carnal in a long time. We don't use that much. It's a biblical word. It's recorded for us several times in the New Testament. Oftentimes it's you'll see carnal written. Sometimes you'll see the word worldly written. But it's a word we ought to be familiar with. Carnal means to be given to physical pleasures and appetites. To be given to physical pleasures and appetites, to care more about the temporal things, to live your life according to the temporal things, to be given to temporal, earthly, worldly things. The idea of carnality. I think Esau is a poster child of biblical carnality. If I had to put together the Fab Five in the Bible, the Fab Five of biblical carnality, it would be Samson, Achan. Achan was the one who took of the things from the accursed things, the possessions, and hid them in his tent when he wasn't supposed to. It'd be Samson, it'd be Achan, be Lot's wife who looked back. She looked back at Sodom and Gomorrah. She looked back at what they had when she was told not to. Maybe King Saul would be fourth on that list. And then Esau. Carnal individuals, they follow the unsuitable example of Esau in three detrimental ways. And I think it's not just unbelievers. It can be Christians, can be carnal. Christians can have a relationship with Jesus Christ, can have their sins forgiven, and can have this relationship with God through Christ, peace made between them and God, and yet live a carnal lifestyle, concerned and caring more about the things that gratify their flesh than the things of God. Carnal individuals follow this example in three detrimental ways. One is they live for the best of this life and their own life. They live for the best of this life and their own life. One of my real concerns is that we as a church do not become known for being made up of people who are carnal, who care more about the things of their own physical appetites, who care more about the things of this life and the things of earth and the things of God, that we become too earthly minded, living for our own life, for the best of this life, thinking that our best life is now. No, our best life is eternity with God. Our best life is not now. Our best life is later. If this is our best life now, we're not going to be very excited about eternity. I mean, how am I going to be excited to spend eternity with God if this is my best? If this is the best there is? But carnal individuals follow Esau in this. They live for the best of this life and their own life. Esau, he wants what will gratify his flesh now. He doesn't think about his children and the generations that will follow. Forever known as Edomites because he chose a bowl of red stuff over the spiritual blessings of God. He lived for his life. They live for the best of this life and their own life. Two, they act impulsively, showing no regard for the cost. Esau is presented by the author of Genesis and by God. He's presented to us in this scene as an impulsive, hasty individual, like a wild animal who doesn't think through the implications of their decision. They act impulsively, showing no regard for the cost. We don't think through our decisions oftentimes. We don't think through how this will impact us tomorrow, or how this decision will impact us in the future if we just play that out a little bit. We don't think through that oftentimes. We act impulsively. We don't show any regard for the cost. Even if we do think about how it might impact us in the future, we rarely go the step of thinking, how will this decision impact my children and my children's children? The decision that Esau made has affected people even to this day. Even to this day, they've been affected by that have come from his line and from his lineage. Don't be like that. Don't act impulsively, showing no regard for the cost. And then third, they despise and treat as worthless the things of God. Ultimately, at the end of everything, he despised the birthright. He gave in to the trap that was set. He fell right into it. He stepped into it. And then afterwards, he just despised the spiritual things, the things of God, the birthright. You know, people may never say with their words that they, especially if they claim to be a Christian, they may never say with their words that they have disdain or they despise the things of God, but they treat those things with disdain. They treat them as worth less than the things of earth. You would never say that. I'm not going to get anybody up here who would say, yeah, I value earthly things more than eternal things. Nobody's ever going to say that. I wouldn't say that. You wouldn't say that. Most of us would never say, and yet, how do we live our life? Do we live our life in such a way that we treat the things of God as worth less than the things of earth? Do we live that way? Spurgeon in one of his lectures to his students over 100 years ago, mentioned that what we have recorded for us in church history, the only biblical record of church history you have are the Acts of the Apostles, not their resolutions, not their sermons, not their sayings, but their acts, what they did. I mean, there might be a sermon or two included in that, but what's recorded for us are their actions. We may never say that we despise and treat the things of God as worth less than the things of this earth, but how do we live? What does our life say? There will come a time in Esau's life, in a couple chapters, where he'll be bitterly angry and he will bitterly regret the decision that he made in the scene that we've just looked at. There will be tears, there will be weeping, but the blessing and the birthright will be gone forever. Don't be like this carnal, godless, immoral man. Our choices today, listen to me, our choices today, your choices today have consequences for eternity. The choices that you make today will have consequences for all of eternity. Not just for you, but for the next generation that will follow after you and the next as well. When the moment of choice comes, look into the future. Consider how that'll impact you in the future and how it'll impact future generations. Before you turn on the computer screen or you pull out your phone and you begin to look at something that is unholy, that is immoral, to gratify a sexual pleasure and desire of your physical appetites, before you do that, think through the implications of that. Don't be like Esau, that godless carnal man who chose to gratify his flesh. Think about how that's going to impact your relationship with your spouse or your relationship with your future spouse if you're not married yet. Think about the effects that will have on your mind and on the way you view others. Think about the implications of how that'll affect your children and your children's children. Before you choose to leave your spouse because you just don't like it anymore, it's just not fun anymore, it's not gratifying anymore, before you choose to make that decision, you better think through the eternal consequences of those kinds of things. Before you choose to skip out on Sunday and take your kids to be involved in all these sports games and prioritize that over church and the things of God, you better think through the effects of that. A couple weeks ago, I ran across somebody who put this post on Facebook, and they put it like this: there's a 0.0296% chance your child will become a professional athlete. There's a 100% chance that they will stand before Jesus. In your everyday life, we got to show our kids the priority that God takes over the things of this earth. I'm not preaching at you. I'm preaching to myself too. I love basketball. I love Carolina basketball. There's something convicting in my own heart when my kids wake up first thing in the morning, they want to know who won the game last night. That's what they care about. Where are they taking their cues from? Where are they getting that from? Is that cool? Is that fun? Yeah. Do we love those things? Yeah. Does that matter more than the things of God? Absolutely not. If I can find time to take my kids to basketball games, I can find time to practice with them, I can find time to teach them the game of basketball, can I not find time to teach them the things of God? Can I not do that? I'm going to stand before Jesus 100%. There's two principles at work governing the universe. There's an earthly principle that says, live your best life now. Today is all that matters. Eat, drink, be merry. Tomorrow we die. Then there's another principle that says earthly choices have eternal consequences. What we do today matters for all of eternity, not just for us, but for the next generation. What principle is controlling you, and what world are you living for? Would you bow your heads and close your eyes? Your heads bowed and eyes closed. Just want to encourage you, challenge you. May the Word of God, the Scriptures, may they speak to all of us today. Don't be like godless, carnal, immoral Esau, who chose to gratify his flesh and his physical appetites over spiritual benefits and blessings. Don't be like him. Father, may you help us. God, may you help us. God, we live and we swim in the culture, in the soup of the culture that we live in, that every day with thousands of images and advertisements and millions of words we receive and consume from those images, they feed our flesh. They feed our flesh. Every day we're fed with our flesh the message. We are fed this message to live for today and to live for the things of this life, to be consumed by it. It is an intense spiritual battle and struggle to come back away from that and to feed the Spirit that lives within us, the things of God, your things, your messages, that care about the things that will last for all of eternity. We have to battle in this war, this spiritual war that we are living in as we rage war against these things. And as these things well up inside of us, we have to fight these things. It is not easy. And have you given us these things? Have you given us sports? And have you given us all of these things to enjoy? And yes. And is there anything wrong with some of these things that are provided to us? No. I mean, if we do them in the right way, they're not wrong. And everything in its rightful place, done the right way, can be okay for us and can be part of life and part of what we enjoy. But you have to take first place. Help us. Empower us through your Spirit to make you first in our life, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.